All right, we are live on part of the platforms. Let's get Instagram
Yep,
rolling. Come on, Instagram.
I know. It's
it's always
There
it's always
we
the
go.
slow child. I just got through saying Zoom was, but
It
Instagram's slow.
is.
How are
It
you, my
is.
dear?
Good. Happy Monday. Happy Monday. It's a
Yep.
holiday. A lot of people didn't work today, including myself, except I did all the things, laundry and clean, and I even made a meatloaf for dinner tonight. So I, even though I didn't work, I was working. How about
Yep.
you?
It was a normal day, I guess, as far as sorry, I'm still getting Zoom rolling over here.
Getting Zoom rolling.
Um, yeah, so getting the BNC community. So my day was good. We had a good day. Um, Snow, cold, but for the most part, it was good. Yeah, it typical day, typical Nebraska weather. I mean, what can I say? But
I know, right? Well, I want to welcome to our three Facebook pages. Of course, YouTube. Welcome, everyone. We've got streaming to two Instagram pages. We are streaming to Twitch and Rumble. And then we will upload these to Hello iHeartRadio, Apple Podcast, and Spotify. Boy, we're just kind of out there. Uh, feeling our way out there. So, anyway, welcome
we
everyone.
do. Yes, we end up when we welcome everyone. I'm excited for tonight. It's been a guest that I've been looking forward to
Yeah.
ever since we had the privilege from KetoCon. I mean, I followed for quite a while, but today we have the honor of welcoming Dr. Bill Schindler, chef, author of an amazing book called Eat Like a Human. He's on a mission to transform the way we think about food, not just what we eat, but optimal health as well, and how we prepare it, how we consume it, that whole realm of things. So get ready for a very fascinating conversation because
Oh,
he's
yeah.
got such an amazing story, kind of like where we've talked with other people from childhood and beyond, essentially, right? Where he has an amazing story from childhood up. So welcome, glad you're
Welcome.
joining us, and I look forward to tonight.
Thank you so
Absolutely.
much. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, so a little bit of the personal journey, the background. You have a long personal journey from childhood into sports and college and beyond. Can you share a little bit of what led you to explore this method, I guess, of eating like
Sure.
a human?
I'd love to. So I'm 52 years old. I just celebrated my 52nd birthday. So I was born in 1973, and like so many people, I'm sure listening, uh, followed everything I was supposed to do in the 70s and 80s for optimal health, and gave up egg yolks, gave up butter, gave up full fat dairy, all those sorts of things. And I had a really, I like to say, unhealthy relationship with food for the majority of my life, probably the first 30 years of my life. And I can tell you the quick version of it now. We can dive into anything else, that any piece of this deeper that you want to. But I grew up an overweight kid that just got made fun of because of the way that I looked. And I know I was carb addicted. I know that when I started to eat food, I just couldn't stop eating. But I didn't look at food at that time in my life as something that nourished me. I looked at food as something that I was addicted to, that made me ugly, made kids make fun of me. And it was a really horrible way to look at food. When And I was overweight, and I know I had all sorts of gut issues as well. And I'm sure the frequency that I was sick was a result of it at some level too. The summer between eighth grade and freshman year in high school, I started running, and I started running a lot. The beginning of that summer, I couldn't even finish a half mile. By the end of the summer, I was running 5 or 6 miles a day,
Mm.
and I shed a lot of that weight. And I entered high school at a place where I was ready to try to do sports for the first time in my life. And I got recruited, to not recruited, but they were starting the first wrestling team they had, since my father had been in the same high school years earlier. He was the last year that they had a wrestling team. I was the first year they brought it back. So It was bound to be. It was destined. So I started wrestling. And I fell in love with it. My diet hadn't changed, and I still was not, I would consider, healthy. But because I was working out so incredibly hard, I started to take the form of an athlete, the shape of an athlete. But I traded one unhealthy relationship with food for another because, as you know, with wrestling, the relationship, especially then, but it's still now, the relationship between food and making weight and all of it is an unhealthy one. I went from food, looking at food and thinking it as something that made me ugly, and now I looked at food as something I was scared of. I wouldn't make weight if I ate too much, right? I was counting calories and literally weighing my food because I didn't want to make sure I made weight. I did pretty well in high school. I got recruited to wrestle at Ohio State, which at the time was one of the best Division I programs in the country, actually still is. And the entirety of this time, I had nutritionists, I had team doctors, I had fellow athletes, I had my medical doctors, everybody telling me what I should be eating, and none of it made sense. When I stopped competing, all the weight poured back on, along with all sorts of other metabolic disease. And I was my 20s and my 20s, especially in my late 20s and my very early 30s, I was in very poor health. I had ballooned up. I was huge. You ever saw a picture of me, you wouldn't recognize me. But more importantly than just the way that I looked, the way that I felt, I was sick all the time. My digestive tract was destroyed. I had all sorts of things going on. And throughout this entire time, 30 years of my life, I tried all the different diets that were out there. And I saw some success with different things at different times, but none of it stuck. None of it was a lifelong way to live. And it wasn't until I realized that my training, my lifelong training, I'm an archaeologist and anthropologist. I was studying ancestral diets for so long. That's what I taught college, university level for 20 years, archaeology and anthropology. And my focus was ancestral diets and the role technology had in these diets and human evolution, all of this. And I realized that I had the answers myself this entire time. So when I started implementing what I knew, or at least thought I knew from the archaeological record, I started to see my health transform. And when it did, I said, oh my gosh, this is a powerful thing. So I started to implement it into my family's diet, and it transformed our health. And that's what drove me to write the book, Eat Like a Human. I just wanted to share this with the world. And in the meantime, more recently, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, we realized that it is not only applicable to one person or to a family, but it's also a way to nourish an entire community. So my family and I started a restaurant called the Modern Stone Age Kitchen. It's in its 4th year. We now employ 25 people, and I'm proud to say we nourish people from our community every single day.
Absolutely. And that's amazing, because I've seen, and I follow the kitchen as well on social. So it's amazing to see some of the food that comes out of there and just how it's evolved, right? Because you end up and you get those people that speaking in regards of ancestrally. So you get that pushback from people saying, but what we ate then isn't what we eat now. And so what is your rebuttal, I guess, to that, when someone would say, but Bill, it's not what we ate 50 years ago that we're consuming today. And it's not the same, quote, healthy foods, right?
I don't know if I understand exactly what you mean. What do you mean?
So many people say we're eating a carrot, for instance, right? I eat a seasonal approach. So I'm not carnivore. I'm not following any, fad type thing. I do ferments. I do seasonal foods. I do, the whole realm. But you'll end up and you'll get people from certain, dietary camps, right, that end up and say, well, the potatoes you're consuming now aren't the potatoes that we even had 10, 15 years ago. They're not healthy for you. They're full of anti-nutrients. They're full of, all these other things. But yet if they're prepared right, it's not necessarily what we're consuming, but it's in the whole preparation side of things, and soaking and fermenting. And, it's not processed foods, right? I'm not eating out of a box. I'm eating a whole food. So what is your take, I guess? Let me rephrase it. What is your take on that aspect when you look at things from an ancestral standpoint, in being able to incorporate some of these? Yes, I am predominantly animal-based nutrition or animal-based protein focus, but I do incorporate some of these other foods. Are they full of anti-nutrients? Are they going to end up and harm us?
That's great questions. So, and now I understand what you mean by that question. So It is very important for us to understand that we are inhabiting 300,000-year-old bodies, but are living in a very modern context, right? So even though, and many of our basic nutritional needs, I truly believe, haven't changed in 300,000 years when the earliest modern day Homo sapien appeared. But everything else has changed. Like everything's changed in a day, in 5 years, in 50 years. Everything else about what our resources are, where we can get them, how we eat, all of those things have changed quite a bit. So I think we can't just, even if we knew, first off, even if we knew what our ancestral diets exactly were, there's a huge diversity of what that actually means. You can't nail it down to one thing. But even if we had a really firm grasp, and I think we have a firm grasp, but if we knew exactly what our ancestors were eating, we can't just pick that up and plop that literally down on a plate today for a number of different reasons. But I do think it's a great foundation to start from. Like that is where, okay, how were we eating what were we eating in the past, and what are we eating today? And then we can start to really have a conversation. But just as importantly, and you bring up a very good point, and this is really the entire context of my book, it isn't just what we are eating, it's how we're eating, how are we preparing those foods? Because one of the things that makes humans different than all other animals on the planet is that we require some sort of technological intervention between that resource in the environment and actually putting it in our mouth. If we don't do certain things to our food, we're not maximizing its safety, its nutrient density, or its bioavailability. So sure, there's things we can put into our mouths, but believe it or not, there's a whole, if we do, especially in the plant world, there's a lot of nutrients in those plants that our body doesn't have access to without either fermenting it or soaking it or sprouting it or drying it or crushing it up or doing all sorts of things to it. And we're literally pooping out a whole bunch of the nutrients. From a more dangerous side, yeah, plants do have toxins. And I know there's colleagues and even very close friends of mine that will say plants are trying to kill you. And I think at some level, there is a little bit of truth to that. I mean, plants are not on this planet to nourish us. Plants are on this planet to live and reproduce viable offspring and have a new generation. I mean, that's what they're there for. We intervene and get some pleasure and nutrients from those plants for sure. But I wouldn't go as far as to say, this, oh my gosh, these plants are here to kill us. So, look, these plants are defending themselves, and we have to recognize that. And we have to make smart choices about plants. There's some plants I will never eat. There's some plants I will eat, many of. But in all cases, I'm making a very smart choice about what plants I choose to eat. And just as importantly, or maybe even more importantly, choose to process them in a way that accomplishes those three tasks, makes them safe, nutrient dense, and as bioavailable as they can possibly be. And fermentation isn't the answer to all of it, but it is quite often the answer, depending on what the plan is and what the context is.
So for someone new that is listening to this, that maybe they have, let the influencers, yes, I am choosing my words wisely because I'm not going to end up and call anyone out or, talk badly about them. I've worked for them. I have colleagues as well that are in that space, and I get it. Anyway. So with all that being said, say someone has just gone meat only, right? Or maybe they're on the flip side of it and they're coming, vice versa. If someone is only meat only, they're looking at reintroducing, they're looking at starting more of like an ancestral or a whole food. Let's just end up and call it that, right? A whole food. What are some of the preparations? What are some of the steps that they can take? Some of the simple first steps obviously would end up and be to get the book and read the book. But for those that are listening, what are some steps that they can end up and take to eat like a human?
Well, let me start that by answering that by saying this. One of the issues today with all of these diets, first of all, they're very polarizing, and we're looking for everybody's looking for clickbait and these profound statements that alienates everybody else. And this is the only answer to, whatever that your problems are. I will say this: when our diets are so incredibly poor on a worldwide scale, but definitely in this country, that any change we make in our diet, we're bound to see an improvement. And what happens is that sort of traps us into this line of thinking that, oh my gosh, I did this thing to my diet. Now all of a sudden, this is the best diet for me the rest of my life. And it doesn't matter if you went from the modern, standard modern diet and American diet and went and started being a vegan or a vegetarian or keto or carnivore or whatever it is, you're going to see improvement. because it's better than what you were doing. I can promise you this, and not enough people are talking about this, and I got caught up in this for a while. I can promise you that the diet that healed you is not the diet for you for the rest of your life, in almost all cases. And because what you were trying to solve in your dietary change at that moment, if it worked, you've solved it. And then the next thing below it that was probably mass or not that important to you because it was, if you're trying to lose weight and you accomplish that goal, then the next thing, maybe it's your joint pain, maybe it's your skin rashes, maybe it's something, whatever it is the next thing that you're looking for. And you're probably going to have to make a dietary shift to then address that next issue. So one of the most dangerous things we can do is lock ourselves into a dietary path, solve it, then talk ourselves into just staying there because you've made this mental switch. I mean, the reality is you're going to have to probably, in all cases, you're going to have to make a change in almost all cases to address what that next issue is. And so many people are just stubborn and they're sticking to something just because they told themselves they should do it. I think it's a very dangerous thing to do. So I love the topic. And now, okay, if you and listen, I love the carnivore approach. I've been carnivore multiple times in my life for extended periods, and it's fantastic.
Oh, I agree.
Like, and because first of all, as soon as you go carnivore, you're getting incredible nutrition. It's very bioavailable. It's incredibly safe. You automatically are keto. You automatically are eliminating all the plant toxins. It's very simple to follow. You don't even have to think very hard. It's like if it comes from an animal, eat it. If it doesn't, you don't eat it. I mean, it checks a whole bunch of amazing boxes. But I love Brussels sprouts. I love it. And fully nourishing yourself means more than just getting your macro and micronutrients. It means all the other parts of life have to be satisfied in order for you to be nourished. So a lot of people are, I love that you brought it up, coming from a carnivore, approach, and then starting to introduce other things. This is what I would suggest, because the other thing is the carnivore diet is an elimination diet by default as well. So I would suggest, number one, when you're reintroducing things, you would do it one at a time, so you can start to see if there's something causing you an issue. I would say, from a plant perspective, and you've probably heard me talk about this before, but I have had humongous issues with oxalates. And from somebody who has studied traditional approaches of detoxifying plants, I have never found a genuine way to mitigate the issues from oxalates in plants. So the number one thing I would do is stay away from them when you're introducing things. But other than that, like you mentioned, if it's a grain, and maybe this is a better way to answer this, I'll tell you exactly what we do in our house and how we approach this at the restaurant. Anything that has any flour in it whatsoever, whether it's gluten-free or not, it has to be through 100% wild, long fermented sourdough process, period. It always is. That doesn't just address the gluten. It also addresses the other issues with a lot of the other, with the other gluten-free flours as well. So if it's a grain, a nut, a seed, or a legume, we're either soaking, sprouting, nixtamalizing, fermenting, or doing a combination of those for the primary focus of detoxification and a secondary focus of making those items more bioavailable. If we're using any sugars whatsoever, they're always unrefined sugar that isn't a fake sugar. So we only use muscovado sugar, maple syrup, or honey. Muscovado sugar is literally just dehydrated pressed sugarcane juice. Our animals are 100%. We butcher, everything's made in house, so we do all in-house butchering, completely nose to tail. So we're using the entire animal for a whole animal approach. Almost all of our dairy is fermented. We will not allow homogenized dairy anywhere in the restaurant, and we are not legally allowed to use raw milk in Maryland, but we only use low temperature vat pasteurized milk from a local dairy.
I was to say, and then you also end up utilizing the kombucha side of things in the kitchen as well.
Absolutely. So we actually we're making our own kombucha. We're getting it from Hex Ferments right now. Because they're doing an amazing job. So we've stepped away from beverages and are just focusing on the food. But it is very important to also recognize, we chose this approach And in order to make it happen, we have to make everything 100% from scratch, because we need to control that process very, very well. Though the processing to me is one of the most important things. But if you're going to be reintroducing some of these things, there's a lot of people that are probably going to purchase yogurt or purchase sourdough bread. What I need people to recognize is that there is a $4 trillion industry trying to fool you and get you to just buy the yogurt or buy the kombucha or buy the sourdough bread. And in many cases, in all cases, it's not as good as what you can make at home, but it's not what is being advertised. So, for example, in this country, you are not allowed to backslop dairy. Backslopping dairy means, on a commercial level, if anybody's ever made yogurt, you take a little bit of the old yogurt, you put it in the new milk, you mix it up, you incubate it at 110 degrees, and then you have your new batch of yogurt. That is illegal to do with dairy. You're not allowed to do it. So if you buy yogurt from anywhere in the country, or kefir from anywhere in the country, it is started every time with a freeze-dried one-use culture, probably made in a lab in Denmark somewhere. So don't be fooled into thinking the yogurt you can make in your kitchen is the same thing you buy at the grocery store, or the kefir when you're straining out your kefir grains every day in your kitchen and you go to the health food store. I don't care how expensive it is. The kefir you buy at the health food store is a completely different food. And sourdough is one of the most bastardized foods in the country. There is only 2 countries in the world that have any sort of labeling requirements for sourdough, and we are not living in one of them. So you can call anything sourdough. And the quick tip is, if you turn it over on a package and it says anything acidic, lactic acid, citric acid, acetic acid, or vinegar, which is acetic acid, then turn it over, because it is not sourdough, and it is no better, I don't care how expensive it is, than the stuff next to the Wonder Bread in the bread aisle.
Exactly, 100%. And that's, they'll even end up and add sour drops to the standard bread. I mean, your bread should be 3 things. It should be starter, flour, and water.
And salt.
Salt.
Yep.
So, but yeah, that's it. That's all that it ends up and it takes for sourdough. And many people are like, but I can get that. No, it's not. And I make my own yogurt, so I know exactly what you're saying in regards to the backslopping. I do it with mine. I started with, a good quality bacteria starter, I guess that's what you want to call it, when I started mine. But then what you lose is the multiplication process of the fermenting process when you are doing that new every time. One of the things, as I was doing my yogurt too, that I never realized was many of the commercial yogurts aren't fermented, but maybe 8 to 12 hours.
Yeah.
So you're truly not getting that full fermentation. My yogurt goes for about 36.
That's
so
long.
I end up and I do I'm attempting at not naming names. I do the 100-degree temperature for 36 hours. So, and I'm able to get raw milk. I go to the dairy farm and get it directly from the cow. Essentially, it goes to the vat and I pull it directly from there. So I know, again, kind of like what you're talking about, right? Is knowing the steps of your process, knowing what you're consuming. And it's lacking in a lot of foods, but that's the hardest thing for people with families. So you had talked about implementing this with not only yourself, but with your family. How would be some of the easy steps that families could end up and start to, look at nutrition differently, look at food that they're bringing into their home on this new level, or, this better level?
The first thing I would say, so the story I like to tell is when I started down this journey, I realized that I didn't know as much about food as I thought I did. And I needed to learn about it all as fast as I could. So I dived down rabbit holes very, very quickly and very, very deeply, so I'm sure many of us do. And I decided that I was going to make our Thanksgiving dinner one year entirely from scratch. I mean, entirely from scratch, every aspect of it. And I was going to have a full-blown Thanksgiving dinner. I mean, everything was done. I mean, I was making cheese, I was curing meats, I was doing all of it. So from charcuterie boards in the beginning all the way through to the final meal and the desserts. I mean, it was 100% from scratch, and I learned a ton. It took me months to make this dinner, months, and it was one of 2 times in my life that I literally went around the corner, and I was so proud of myself. I physically patted myself on the back. I was so proud. Everybody was nice. Some of it tasted good. Some of it, a lot of it didn't taste good. Some of it looked good. A lot of it didn't look good. But I accomplished what I set out to do. And then we cleaned it all up. Everybody left. We had a lot of family in. And the next morning I woke up and I had this really strange, overwhelming feeling. And I couldn't put my finger on it, but it's like one of those, like I knew something was wrong, something was missing, something was lacking. I couldn't figure out what it was. And I finally realized that I did all that work for literally nothing for one night. I spent months and months and months and months for one night. Now, look, did I learn a lot? Yes. But did I make a difference in anybody's health? No. I mean, I didn't make anybody sick, which was a huge accomplishment, but I didn't transform their health. And it was at that moment that I realized that, okay, that was fun. I can talk about it on the podcast. We have some great photos of it, but that's the only lasting legacy of months and months and months of work. What I needed to focus on instead were the more mundane things, the stuff that my kids were eating every single day. So at that moment, I vowed that we were never going to buy bread again. That was my first step. We were going to make sourdough bread at home, period. And we literally haven't bought a slice of bread since ever. And we started making all our own sourdough bread. And that was my first step. And then, but because now we can have huge discussions about whether or not we should be eating bread or not. But regardless, I knew that my family, my kids were eating 2 slices of bread every single day. And they were very young at the time. And they were going to be doing it all through middle school and high school and probably through. And if I could impact them every day at that level, that would compound to make a huge dramatic impact. So I started with sourdough bread, and then I started trying to ferment all sorts of different things, and we still do today. I will tell you, I do the cool thing about fermentation, as I'm sure you know, is that the process is almost identical for bread and yogurt and alcohol and even with meats, and in some cases it's exactly the same bacteria. The same bacteria, the primary one responsible for making sauerkraut, Lactobacillus plantarum, is the same one that's primarily responsible for making fermented cured meats like real salamis. And just getting into one of them helps you take that next step into all the other ones. But I will say, for a long time, I'm very passionate about cheese, very passionate and cheese and fermented dairy. I had a mesophilic yogurt culture going, I had a thermophilic yogurt culture going, I had kefir going, I had different cheese cultures. I had all these things happening all over the house. They were very hard to keep up with. Again, I learned a ton, but what I also learned was if I was going to keep one culture at home going, dairy culture, it would be kefir, period, because you can do anything with kefir. It has the largest diversity of bacteria and yeast, and I can make every cheese on the planet with those cultures. I can make yogurt with that culture. I can even make alcohol with that culture. I could do everything with just kefir, and I was able to trim that down. But sourdough bread, a fermented vegetable like sauerkraut, and some kind of fermented dairy like yogurt or kefir are huge starts. And you know what? They really are sauerkraut isn't really a basis for that many diets, but those kind of things are really a basis for a lot of diets, household diets.
So I'm going to back you up a second if I can. So when you said you had, I know, you had the aha moment of eating like a human, right? And how did your wife buy into all of that? I'm just curious. Like, you came to her and went, guess what?
It wasn't as much that moment so when we first met, she was a vegetarian. She was a vegetarian for the first few years we were together, and even in the first years of our marriage, and until she was pregnant with our son, our second child, and she started craving meat. Actually, she started craving kielbasa, which is she has anyhow. It's childhood memories for her, and then slowly, went through that to chicken and a whole bunch of other things. So it wasn't as much this sort of aha moment. Hey, I'm going to transform how we're eating in the house. That was not stumbling block, but things we had to overcome. It was more like, wow, you're really trying to bring the entire animal into the kitchen. Kind of a thing was different. That was more of a stumbling block. I will tell you, when I just would say, hey, we're going to do this, it didn't go over very well. But when we literally sat down, and sometimes it wasn't as easy as it sounds like right now, but when we sat down and had a conversation about why it was important, and we started, probably I talked too much about it to death, the archaeological aspect of this or the anthropological, that made it a little bit more real. But we've been very fortunate we've spent a lot of time as a family traveling to all sorts of remote places, working with indigenous and traditional groups, sharing food, cooking with, learning from indigenous and traditional groups in different places. And those immersive experiences were profound for all of us, the entire family. And we really don't have to say much after, that. When we came back from something like that, it's like, okay, the questions on the plane home was, okay, how do we take what we just learned here and implement it into our modern lives today? And it's hard. I can imagine that if I tried to bring all this into our house without having those experiences, it probably would have been a little more difficult.
So as far as your mission work and going and researching and doing these missions, what's next on the agenda?
That's a great question. So we have our nonprofit, the Food Lab, which is part research, part teaching and outreach. So we have a lot of research dreams and goals that we're looking to do. We want to work with the Sami in northern Scandinavia. We're hopefully going to be in the Amazon this summer. So we have a lot of things up for that. But as far as the teaching goes, we have a whole slate of new classes that we're launching and experiences in the summer. But we're hopefully expanding the teaching kitchen to make it a little bigger, because the classes are really, really well received. And I love, just like the Thanksgiving, I love feeding people a meal in the kitchen. But I really love being able to empower people to make these changes in their home, because that's where the real lasting change takes place. So you can look for new classes, new, hopefully expanded teaching kitchen, and new experiences. And every summer we do these immersive trips that we take people on. So every year we do one to Ireland. It's a food, culture, history, prehistory tour of Ireland. It's one of the most magical things that we do. I absolutely love it. And there's a good chance we're going to be doing a trip next winter to Kenya as well. Similar kind of thing.
Wow. So with so much, I think Sherry has another question too, but
That's
with
all
so
right.
much misinformation out there in regards of food and health and nutrition, what do you feel needs to end up and be the change that we make to make this ripple effect forward, right? We are seeing so many metabolic conditions, so many deterioration of people's health. What is some of the change that needs to end up and be made, or the education to people?
I think the biggest thing we need to do, the biggest agent of change needs to be the self. It needs to be the individual person. People need to trust their senses. We have senses for a reason. We have our eyes and our nose and our sense of taste and touch and smell. All of those things are there to help keep us safe and keep us nourished. And we bypass all those things. We look at a label, listen to somebody tell us what to eat. We literally shut those senses off and just shove stuff in our mouth. I fully, wholeheartedly believe that if we are in tune with our senses and faced with truly nourishing food, we don't have to listen to anybody else tell us how to eat. We know when to start eating, when to stop eating, how much to eat, all of those things. We can make those decisions for ourselves. So I love podcasts. I love speaking on podcasts. I love listening to podcasts. I love books. I love conferences. I love all of those things. And they have a very important place right now. But I hope all of them are working towards empowering people to make their own decisions, because we've always made our own decisions. It's only up in recent times that people have been telling us how we should eat. And it's because of this disconnect. So the most important thing that anybody can possibly do, and these steps can be very small and incremental at first, so they're very easy to take. The number one thing you need to do is start removing links from your food chain. Again, it can be very easy, very, very easy, simple steps that compound over time. But the closer you can get to your food, where it's coming from, how it's prepared, then you can start to take control over these decisions. Again, listen to all sorts of people. I listen to them, but you need to filter it through your own sense of understanding and connection that you get by taking those steps and removing those links.
Absolutely. Getting to know your farmer and your rancher. Before I let Sherry answer a question, because I jump in every time. I do want to remind people, if you're watching us on any of these social media platforms, here in about the next few minutes, we will be kicking the social medias off to do a private Q&A in the BNC community. So if that interests you, get to the BNC community so that You can be in the back studio with all the other folks that are over there. But yeah, and that's one of the things that we do focus on in Beyond Nutrition. That's why I named it Beyond Nutrition, because it's not dogmatic in just, keto or carnivore or paleo, what works for you as a person. And there may be several of us in a meeting and we all end up and do it differently. We may talk about, what we're doing, but again, that whole sourcing side of things, right? My beef, I just got half a beef that we ordered, and it was raised 45 minutes from me. I know exactly the farmer that raised it, and we're splitting it with our oldest son, but I know where it come from. I know I go to the dairy farm and get my milk, So like you said, cutting those links out, that is the biggest thing. And most people can find it within a radius of their place if they just look. But go ahead, Sherry.
Well, I was going to ask. So, before we had started the podcast, I had told you that we became those people and purchased property in the middle of nowhere, and we're going to become, basically regenerative homesteaders. Who knows what we're going to do? We're going to have chickens, I can tell you that. But I live in my travel trailer. So it is, and I have a very small refrigerator in my travel trailer. How do I, somebody like me who space is a premium, where would I or where would someone to start fixing, creating their own foods? I mean, obviously, I'm not going to jump in and start making cheese, although I've watched your cheese, looks good. But it's like, what would you suggest where, I literally have this much space, prep work space? Where do I start?
That is a fantastic question.
Ooh.
I was not prepared for that question. Again, I think something like if you would absolutely choose the things that you're eating every day to make a difference there. So it wouldn't be, if you're not eating cheese, I wouldn't start a cheese making hobby, because it's not going to, even if you were able to do it in a small space, it's not going to make sense, right? So I would absolutely, again, kefir is one of my favorite things in the world, just because of it's a great gateway to all of this, and it produces such a versatile range of bacteria and yeast you can do anything with. And as far as if you're going to start eating grains, or you already do eat grains, and you're thinking about sourdough, one of our most popular classes is a sourdough bread class. But another incredibly popular class is just our sourdough mother class. And all I do in that class is we go over how to start, maintain, and deal with your sourdough mother. But then it's all the other things you can do with a sourdough mother besides just bread. And it's incredibly versatile. You can do all sorts of things with that mother that are easier to do in smaller spaces, and you don't need a special oven or Dutch ovens or any of these other kind of things. So I think those would be my first two places. But the cool thing about fermentation is, first off, it forces you to remove those links. And I've been foraging wild plants since I was 10 years old. I love it. But I never really realized that dealing with things like a sourdough mother is a form of foraging. I mean, it's literally wild bacteria and yeast that you are taking and you're harnessing and you're babysitting and you're trying to control, but it's also impacting it's a give and a take relationship. I'm not trying to get all kumbaya here, but it is a very beautiful ancient thing. And it also, it requires an understanding of things like temperatures, obviously, but all of these fermentation techniques have been around a heck of a lot longer than refrigeration has been. In fact, part of the reason people ferment is because they're trying to not have to worry, or before they didn't have a way to refrigerate. So I think the fermentation is a great place to start. It'd be very hard to bring home a half a pig and slap it on your counter without a refrigerator to put it all in. But the fermentation can be as big or small, I think, as you want it to be.
Very good. Thank you. I was saying I would love to take your classes. So let me know when you're going to be, back here in Texas,
Back to Texas?
so we can.
Absolutely. Hopefully soon.
Yeah, that I would agree. That is probably one of the smallest. My poor kitchen looks like a lab because I've got like 2 different kombuchas going. I've got all sorts of fruits and vegetables and stuff going. So sourdough going, and that's just it. being able to impact families. I think that's the biggest takeaway, right? Being able to impact not only your family, but teaching and expanding into others. And so, yeah, before we end up when we kick the social medias off, any final words that you end up and you want to say to them?
Me? Yeah, absolutely. The number, so something to remember is we also need to enjoy our food. For some reason, we've gotten into this idea that we have to be a martyr in order to get healthy. Like we should go without, we should be in pain, we should feel hungry, and if we're not feeling some sort of loss, we're not making a gain. And that's a very ridiculous thing to think about. I mean, it makes sense if all of our senses are tuned in to nourish us and keep us healthy. Then it just makes sense that the diet that in most cases can heal us should also be the most delicious and the most satiating and the most filling and the most gratifying. And I wholeheartedly believe this. You can absolutely lose weight and feel satiated at every meal. In fact, you should. That's kind of the point. So one thing that I like to say now, and I've heard a lot of good feedback from this advice, giving this advice. One of your goals should be, and primary goal should be, that every time you get up from a table, you should feel better than when you sat down at it. That's it. And that is simple. And it's sort of like, oh yeah, of course. But if you really think about it, do you really, like most of the time, do you really, when you get up, do you feel satiated? Do you feel good? Do you feel content? Do you feel nourished? In many cases, not. I mean, in most cases, some people, if they're on a diet, they probably feel hungry. If they're not on a diet, they've probably overstuffed themselves and they have to go get some antacid or open up a belt, a hole on their belt, or they're just shoving down some kind of food that they hate and they're doing it completely by themselves. Like, figure it all out at the same time. Like, eat slowly with people that you love, have great conversations, and that food should be satiating and delicious. And you're going to make gains or losses, whatever you're looking for, in ways you can never imagine, and you'll enjoy it the entire time.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And stay here. I'm just going to end up and kick all the other socials off so that our VIPs in the back studio can ask their questions. By Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, all of y'all.
Yep, by Instagram.